Chapter 29. John, finished the second barn today. We're going to begin moving the horses inside and take down the little stables tomorrow. Now we need more room for housing, as our group has grown again. I met a few people down in Buellton, and they've decided to join us. This place is really taking off. I miss you, son. Dad. Any change in the message? John asks Ray as they walk through the house. It's the same as it's been for the last month or so. That's not encouraging. No, it's not. So we can't expect any help to arrive anytime soon. No, we can't. Ray shakes his head and looks down at the map spread out on the old dining room table. All right then, let's get this thing started. The map is a combination of drawn images and 3D pieces representing different parts of the ranch, such as the house, barns, outbuilding structures, fire tower, and front gate. Most of the parts are simple wooden blocks, salt and pepper shakers, or other household items. Okay, John says, while pointing to the area near the road where some small wooden blocks are being used to represent trees. We've already dug most of the pits between the trees by the main road and camouflaged them with stick and leaf coverings. That should slow down any charge from the front. Yeah, but it's likely that Zeke will avoid doing that, unless we encourage him to do it, John says. Like baiting him in? Exactly. Did you have a plan for that? I'm working on it, but let's concentrate on the other projects we need to work on first, John says, turning back to the map. Because the borders of the ranch are so large and undefined for the most part, we're going to have to rely on placing a watch in the fire tower to alert us to any attacks coming from our flanks. Makes sense. We need to place some barriers along the driveway that would discourage anyone from trying to drive a vehicle down and into the main area of the farm. We do have a supply of beams left over from the barn raising. We could build some impressive obstacles from them. That should work. We need to move the horses out of the barns and relocate the chickens and goats as well. No need for them to get killed in a firefight. That shouldn't be a problem. We can just release the horses into the fields with the cows, and chickens and goats can be placed into one of the trailers until things are over, one way or another. John looks at Ray and nods slowly. One way or another, he says. What about the kids? I think they should be moved out to the cabin by the river. Someone can be assigned to watch over them. What about Robin? John thinks about that for a moment and then nods. I think that would work. She's going to want to be involved, and she can shoot, almost as good as I can. I'll talk to Mary about it, see what she thinks. John looks down at the map and sighs. This would be easier if we had more people. But we can't do anything about that, so it is what it is. Agreed. They stand there for a few moments, just looking down at the map, before John turns to Ray. You said we had plenty of guns, he says. Yeah, come with me. They're down here? John asks as they descend the steps down into the basement below the main house again. But instead of heading to the little radio room, Ray turns and heads to the other side of the musty-smelling cellar. He moves a few wooden crates away from the section of the wall, revealing an unseen door, recessed into the concrete foundation. It's so well hidden that the seam for the sides and top are barely visible to the naked eye. Give me a hand with this, Ray says, before opening a small hatch built into the wall. Inside is a T-shaped handle that folds out. Ray starts pulling, a grunt escaping his lips as the door begins moving. John moves around to his right side and grabs the edge of the door and pushes. The massive 2-inch thick steel door moves slowly, the bottom edge scraping slightly on the dusty concrete floor. After a few seconds, they have it open enough to walk inside the room beyond. How did you even get this thing installed? John asks. It wasn't easy. There's a switch on the wall. John hits it, and a single fluorescent bulb blinks stubbornly to life, illuminating the small room. 2 steel cages mounted to the wall contain a dozen high-powered rifles, including some that John has never seen. A third section is comprised of a custom pegboard, where 8 handguns live, each one resting on a series of pins. The lower portion of the wall is home to a dozen cabinets with metal doors with mesh fronts. John peers inside at the boxes of ammunition stacked neatly on the black shelves. "That's impressive," he says. "Thanks. Your dad collected all this when he was more militant, I guess you might say." "Well, it's certainly going to come in useful," John says, his eyes flitting across the impressive home arsenal. "I thought it would." "We should get these upstairs and get someone to clean and get them ready." "Yeah, I think Anna and Greg could take care of that," Ray suggests. "Good. Well, we also have these," Ray says, opening the cabinet closest to the door and removing a bright orange box about the size of a small suitcase. He opens the lid to reveal a set of 4 flare guns with more than 20 individual flare cartridges. "We need those taken out to the fire tower right away." "I'll get someone on that," Ray says. They're about to exit the room when Delia comes running down the stairs. "Ray, John!" she shouts. What is it?" John asks as they rush out of the hidden armory. "We have visitors," she says, trying to catch her breath. "Zeke already?" "No," she says, shaking her head. "It's someone else." "Who?" "I don't know. They just said they wanted to talk to the owner." Ray looks at John and he shrugs his shoulders. "Are they armed?" John asks as they start heading back up the stairs with Delia in the lead. "They have weapons, but they're not threatening us." "How many are there?" Ray asks. 4. "Okay, I guess we should go see what they want," John says. Ray and John rush through the house, exiting the front door onto the porch and then heading directly to the Scout. John climbs in behind the wheel, and they race up to the front gate, the tires on the truck tossing bits of gravel into the air behind them. Less than a minute later, John pulls over to the side of the driveway and puts the old Scout in park. In the distance, he can see a group of 4 people standing at the front gate, conversing with Dean and Stacia. The visitors look like they range in age from 50 or so to as young as 20. "Do you know them?" John asks Ray as they walk. "I don't think so. Wonder where the hell they came from." "I guess we're going to find out." Dean turns as they approach and walks toward Ray and John. "What's going on?" John asks. "They want to talk to you." "To me?" John asks. "To either of you, I guess." "What do they want, do you know?" He shakes his head. "They wouldn't tell me. They just insisted on talking to you." "They armed?" "Yeah, but all their weapons are either holstered or slung." "All right then, let's go see what they want," John says. They walk back up to the gate, and one of the strangers makes eye contact with John, and he turns and says something to his 2 companions, a young man in his 20s and a middle-aged man. But it's impossible to tell what it was. Their final member, a young woman dressed in your typical farmhand attire, stands off to the side. "Can we help you with something?" John asks. "I'm not sure," the man replies. He's tall, with a bald head and an impressive bearing. He doesn't look like someone you want to mess with. "Okay," John says, frowning slightly. "What does that mean?" "Is your name John?" "How did you know that?" he asks, frowning at them. "Do you know someone by the name of Zeke?" the big man asks, ignoring John's question. "We do. Are you friends?" John looks at Ray for a moment. "Not at all." "Then we should talk," the bald man says. Chapter 30. John. Had something happen today with one of our members. He attacked someone who he was living with. someone who I know and trust. I already thought that he was a problem when his first wife died mysteriously. But now this. I don't think we have a choice. We have to send him away. But I don't think this is the end of it. Dad. How do you know my name? John asks as the homesteaders and the visitors stand on opposite sides of the gate, staring at each other. This Zeke person mentioned it to us. I'm assuming you're Ray, he says, looking over at him. How do you know Zeke? Ray asks. He came to see us. To see you? Yeah. He wanted to know if we wanted to join with his group. Ray looks at John while Dean and the others suddenly tense up, hands gripping their weapons a little more firmly. Stacia lowers her rifle and sights the big man through the scope. And you told him what? I think I told him no way in hell. John lets out his breath and grins. I take it that didn't go over well. You could say that. We own a small farm not too far from Buellton. Mostly dairy cows, horses, and chickens, along with some fruit trees. John looks down the highway in both directions, and then back at the small group. How many of you are there? 6. There's me, my wife Julia, our daughter Rose, and 3 of our farmhands, Derek, Sam, and Ashley, he says. I only see 4 of you, John says. Did you walk all the way from Buellton? No, of course not, he replies, before turning and whistling. A young woman about the same age as the big man walks out of the woods across the highway, accompanied by an 8-year-old girl. They stop on the shoulder and wait, staring anxiously across the roadway. John turns to Ray and takes him aside for a moment, just out of earshot of the visitors. What do you think? John asks, whispering quietly. They seem okay, and they don't appear to be fans of Zeke by any stretch of the imagination. John nods. I agree. We can take them in and see what they have to say. We need to talk more first, but I don't want to do it out here in the open. That works for me, Ray says, before he and John step back over to the gate. Open it up, John says to Dean, who undoes the lock and swings it back. The big man steps up directly in front of John. What's your name? Daniel. Well, Daniel, like you said, we need to talk. So what happened when he came to see you? John asks, as Daniel, Julia, Lori, Ray, and Mary are sitting on the front porch of the main house. The other visiting farmhands, as well as Daniel's daughter, are feeding and watering the horses, while getting something to fill their bellies as well. The first time, he was nice enough. It was a few days before this blackout thing. He said he was looking for some people to help him rebuild an old farm that belonged to him, and wondered if we might be interested. And what did you tell him? After we talked for a while, I said we'd have to think about it. I could tell that he wasn't thrilled with that answer, but he said that was fine and went on his way. The guy is creepy, Julia says while shaking her head. Yeah, there was something off about him, Daniel says. There's definitely something off about him, Lori says with a chuckle. How did you know that he was from here? Ray asks. I didn't, Daniel says. Not at the time, anyway. The next day I was in town at the diner, and I mentioned it to Kelly, one of the waitresses, and she told me that he was bad news and that you guys had thrown him out because he beat up someone. It was a little more than that. He killed his first wife and tried to kill one of our other members, Ray says. I knew there was something fucked up about the guy, Julia says, and then blushes. Sorry, she says, apologizing for her language. Don't fucking worry about it, Lori replies, and everyone laughs. What happened the second time he showed up? John asks. Well, that went down a little differently. He brought some friends with him, a bunch of idiots with guns. He told me that I had a choice. I could give him half of what we had, or he and his people would kill us and take everything for themselves. Sounds familiar, John says, while looking at Ray. So you decided to give it up? Mary asks. There's only 6 of us. We only had 2 rifles between us. They would have killed us all, Daniel says, slipping his arm around his wife's shoulder and hugging her to his side. I couldn't let that happen. I don't blame you for that, John says. Sometimes a strategic withdrawal is better than a suicidal stand. Besides, I knew that once we gave him half, he'd want 3/4, and then he'd want everything. I think that's probably an accurate statement. Can I ask you something else? Sure, Ray replies. Why didn't you call the cops if you thought he killed his wife? John looks at Ray and tilts his head to the side as they wait for an answer. I wish we had, he says, shaking his head slowly. But at the time, it felt more urgent to get rid of him. We didn't really have any proof that he killed his wife, just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. We made a mistake in not turning him in. Daniel nods. Well, hindsight is always 20/20, I suppose, he says. So, what is it you want from us? John asks. I'm not really sure. You must have some idea. We were hoping that you might have room for us, Julia says. But if you don't, we understand. Ray looks at John and he nods. You are more than welcome to join us, Ray says, although sleeping quarters are going to be quite cramped. You are aware that Zeke is more intent on capturing this place than he ever was about yours, right? John asks. He wants revenge on those he thinks wronged him. We get that, and we're willing to fight. We just didn't have the firepower or numbers that would have given us any chance of winning, Daniel says. Well, we could certainly use the help, John says. We're trying to boost our defenses because Zeke is likely to be back any day now, Ray says. We can help with that, and Julia is a crack shot with a rifle, as are Derek and Sam, Daniel says. This is going to be dangerous, John says. It's sort of like you're out of the frying pan and into the fire. Better than the alternative. I suppose so, Ray says. I do have some questions for you, John says. Shoot. How many people did Zeke bring with him to your farm that second time? 4 or 5? John shakes his head, a frustrated look on his face. That's not helping us figure out how many people he has overall, or where his headquarters is. Oh, I can show you that, Daniel says. What's that now? Chapter 31. John. I'm sorry about the way I treated Claire. I've been thinking back on it recently, and I can't even come up with a reason why I was so cold to her. Other than I was a gigantic asshole, and I thought she was going to come between us somehow, and then I ended up driving us apart anyway. I don't expect you to ever forgive me for the way I acted, but I hope it helps to know that I regret everything. Dad. Can you repeat that? Mary asks, staring at Daniel. I can show you where Zeke has his headquarters. John looks at Ray, and he shakes his head. Should I ask how the hell you know where it is? I know more than just where it is. I've been there, he replies. John frowns, unsure how to react to this stunning news. Well, if no one else is going to ask, why the fuck would you have been there? Lori asks. That first time he came to visit, the one when he was friendly and open, he asked if I wanted to see his place, Daniel says. And you said yes? Julia didn't want me to, but I thought it might be a good idea to see how crazy the bastard was. A risky strategy, John says. That's what I told him, Julia says, reaching over and taking his hand. I didn't think I had a choice. I didn't want to piss him off. I could tell he was a bit of a nut within the first 5 minutes of meeting him. At best, I thought it might give us more time to come up with a plan. A bit of a nut? Lori says, shaking her head. He's batshit crazy. Thank you, Lori, John says, before turning back to Daniel. So, tell us everything. After I said yes, he wanted to drive me, but I said I'd just follow him since I had to go into town anyway. That was a lie, I'm sure. Of course it was. I wasn't about to get into a vehicle with him. Anyway, we headed out of our place and then went west down the highway. As soon as we started driving, I knew something wasn't right. There aren't a lot of farms up here, as you well know, and there's only one that was unoccupied as far as I knew. The Baker place, Ray says. What's the Baker's place? John asks. It's a small farm west of Buellton. It used to be owned by Old Man Baker. Mean son of a bitch, Ray replies. We would trade every now and then, but he was a crotchety old dude. That's him, Daniel says. He died about 10 years ago or so. Yeah, something like that, Ray adds, nodding his agreement. So we continued down the highway until we reached a turnoff. I knew it was for the Baker's place, but I kept following. Why is it such a big deal that it was the Baker's place? Mary asks. Because they never put it up for sale, Daniel says. Baker might have been a bit of a dick, but he wanted the farm turned into a nature preserve. He didn't want anyone buying it and building houses on the land or something like that, Ray says. Exactly, which means that Zeke and his people were squatting on the property, but he told me he had just bought it. Ray shakes his head. Just another one of his lies. So, what did the place look like? John asks. Daniel chuckles quietly. Well, you have to remember that it had been abandoned for close to 10 years. And when you have a property that no one is looking after, with our harsh winters and aggressive undergrowth, it doesn't take long before things start to go bad. The main house was a wreck. I wouldn't have let my dog stay in it. It looked like a stiff wind might topple it. The barn and outbuildings were not much better, but he kept saying how great it was and how proud he was. How many people did he have? At that time, I think I saw about 25, give or take a few, but I may not have seen everyone. 25, John says, looking over at Ray, who shakes his head. But we took out a few already, Lori says. But who knows how many he has now? Could be less, she replies. Could be more. Are you sure this is a good idea? Mary asks, as she's standing at the window of the Scout. The last time you went out, it didn't end well. I'm not sure any of this is a good idea, but we're committed now, John replies. Daniel is sitting in the front passenger seat, and Lori is in the back with Rebecca. I've got them to protect me, he says, nodding his head toward the girls. Mary moves to the back door and leans on the doorframe. Take care of him, okay? He saved me. I'm not about to let him get killed, Rebecca replies. Her quick smile and brilliant green eyes hide something fierce beneath. She runs her hands through her short black hair and taps the back of the seat behind John. Let's get going. I don't want to miss dinner, she says. Do me a favor while I'm gone. Get those flare guns up to the tower and explain to them what we talked about, John says, looking out the window at Mary. Don't worry, I got it. Be careful and we'll see you back here before dark. We will. See you soon. He starts the old truck up and then heads down the driveway. There are a couple of crews working on the wooden barriers, so John has to drive around them as they approach the gate. Where are you headed? Dean asks as he steps out of the trees when John stops at the end of the driveway. Down to the old Baker place. He nods and then frowns. Be careful. We will, John replies, as Dean walks away to open the gate. After he swings it open, John starts driving through, and Rebecca leans out the window and blows a kiss to Stacia, who is crouched in the trees watching the road. She waves back and Rebecca settles back into her seat. John pulls onto the highway, and they head back down toward Buellton. John watches the highway and the trees that create a sort of untopped tunnel effect as they drive along the gentle dips and rises of the road. Not far from Buellton, a dark cloud looms in the sky, fed by a thin line of smoke that rises from the ground. its source hidden by the hills. "Is the town on fire?" Lori asks while peering through the windshield. "That would be my farm," Daniel says. "Your farm?" Rebecca asks, her brow furrowing. "Did Zeke burn it down?" Lori asks. "No, I did." John looks over at him as they pass an abandoned delivery truck that they've seen multiple times over the last few weeks. "You burned it down?" "I did. If we weren't going to be there, I wasn't going to leave anything behind for him to take," he says, his expression hard and stoic. "What about your livestock?" "I just released them. Zeke and his people didn't seem like the brightest, so I doubt they'd know how to round up cattle or chickens," he says, chuckling quietly. "I figured that when or if this all gets settled, we can rebuild and recapture as many of them as we can." "That must have been a hard decision," John says. "When it came down to a choice between my family and my farm, it was an easy decision." "I get that," John says. John steers around an abandoned car and then slows down as they reach the hill before Buellton. "What's the matter?" Lori asks. John turns to Daniel. "Is there a way to the other side of town without actually having to go through it?" he asks. "Yeah, there's a dirt road that passes by the old granary. No one uses it anymore since the place burned down almost 20 years ago." "Where will that bring us out in relation to the Baker farm?" Probably about a quarter of a mile. And that end of the road is so overgrown hardly anyone knows it's there." "Sounds perfect. Also, if we hike about 10 minutes from the end, we'll end up on a rise that overlooks the entire farm." "All right, you sold me," John says, chuckling. "Just point out where the turnoff is. On it." Chapter 32. John. "Bought an old tractor yesterday from down in Buellton. I think we're going to try and grow some crops, maybe some corn and a bit of wheat. See if we can become a little more self-sufficient. Added about a dozen chickens and goats last month, so we have eggs and milk. I'm also starting to collect more firearms. I don't like the way things are going, and I think we need to be prepared. I sure do miss seeing you. Dad." "Turn here," Daniel says, and John pulls off the highway onto the barely visible side road. The Scout rumbles off the smooth tarmac, onto the much rougher, crumbling asphalt track. Thin saplings and other wild bushes and weeds scrape the side of the truck as they continue venturing farther down the abandoned road. Every now and then, the front end of the truck drops down into a pothole or dip, and the entire Scout shudders. "Jesus, John!" Lori complains. "Sorry, I can't help it. I can't even see the road through all the weeds and undergrowth," he says, just as they hit another hole. "Fuck me," Rebecca says, as she holds on to the back of John's seat and the back of hers at the same time. John just shakes his head and concentrates on the road. A few minutes later, things finally begin to smooth out, and the weeds begin to thin. "Holy shit," Lori says, as she stares out the window at the massive ruin in the distance. The remains of 2 towering grain elevators and a main building the size of a football field dominate the landscape. The blackened exterior and partially collapsed walls don't diminish the reality of what must have been an impressive structure in its heyday. "That's pretty much what killed the town," Daniel says. "When it burned, it was like losing the heart of the community. After that, everything started heading downhill." "Guess they couldn't rebuild," Rebecca says. "No way they could have afforded it," Daniel replies, a sad tone to his voice. They pass in front of the remains of the granary, rolling slowly along the abandoned road, swerving now and again to avoid debris or one of the hundreds of potholes that have turned the road into an obstacle course. The town of Buellton is visible in the distance out the right side of the Scout. Lori peers through the binoculars as they drive. "I don't see anything moving in town," she says. I'm sure that Zeke and his people have stripped the place clean by now, John says. If they ever got enough balls to come back after they ran away the last time, she replies, chuckling to herself. They leave the old ruins behind, and almost immediately, the road conditions worsen, and John has to slow down even more to avoid shaking the truck or themselves to death. How much further is it? He asks Daniel, while trying to figure out a way through the weed-choked road. There's a rise up ahead. Once we get to the top, we can pull off and take the rest on foot, he says, pointing through the windshield. About 10 minutes later, they start ascending the hill Daniel was talking about. The tires of the old Scout gripping the loose asphalt and tree roots with varying degrees of success. This should be good, Daniel says, when they're about 50 feet from the top of the rise. John stops the Scout and engages the handbrake as tightly as he can before putting the old truck into park. When he lifts his foot off the brake pedal, the Scout shifts, but everything seems to hold, although it moans slightly. All right, let's go, John says as he climbs out. Lori grabs her rifle, and Rebecca retrieves her hunting bow and arrows from the cargo area. John slips his pistol into his belt and looks over at Daniel. Shit, did you bring a weapon? He pulls an 8-inch Bowie knife out of the scabbard clipped to his belt. I got this, he says, grinning at John. You brought a knife to a gunfight, he says, shaking his head. It'll still kill you dead, he says. Suppose so. They head up the hill, making their way through the dense undergrowth of weeds. Thin little saplings and tree roots that threaten to trip or injure them with every step. Not to mention the myriad bugs that buzz and flip by and around them. They crest the top, and the terrain levels out, but the trees remain as thick as before. They can see Buellton off to the east, nestled in the tiny valley. Just down this way, Daniel says, as they move between the trees, constantly on the alert for any other hikers. Daniel begins moving slower and lower, staying closer to the trees and pausing each time before moving on. The others stay close on his heels, their senses on high alert. After about 10 minutes, Daniel stops and signals with his hand for the others to get down. John stays low as he moves forward until he's next to Daniel. Right down there, he says, pointing through the trees at a small farm, perhaps 500 yards away at the bottom of the hill. The property consists of a tiny, dilapidated farmhouse in need of a new roof, front porch, and paint. A red and white barn that doesn't look in much better condition is situated about 20 yards from the house. There are 4 older model sedans and 2 pickup trucks parked haphazardly in front of the house. John takes the binoculars from Lori and zooms in on the buildings. Approximately 10 individuals are milling around the house, while another 8 or 9 are working near the barn. It's hard to get an accurate count because they keep coming in and out of the buildings, and a lot of them are dressed the same: blue jeans, boots, and t-shirts, or in some cases, no shirts. There are 5 people on the front porch cleaning a variety of firearms, from rifles to handguns, each one propped up against the railing or carefully laid out on a blanket on the ground. How many do you count? Daniel asks as he's lying on the ground next to John. I've got something like 18 or 19. And that's about what I have. I don't see any women. Me neither. Zeke's not a big equal opportunity sort of guy, John says. Yeah, I can see that. Do you see Zeke? Rebecca asks from behind them. Not at the moment. Lori is crouched behind a tree a few feet away, watching the farm through the scope on her rifle. She has the barrel rested in a notch on the tree, helping her steady her aim. I've got him, she says, without looking up. Where? John asks. At the corner of the house, talking with that small group. John shifts his focus, and less than a second later, spots the bearded man addressing about a half a dozen of his followers. He's waving his arms in the air and gesturing. But whatever he's saying, the crowd doesn't seem to understand what he's talking about. "I can take him out," Lori says, as she adjusts her aim slightly. "I'm not—" "Hey, what are you doing?" someone shouts behind them. John rolls over on his back and pulls his pistol, immediately spotting the young man armed with an old hunting rifle, standing a few yards away, the gun pointed at them. Before he can fire, Rebecca spins around, pulls an arrow, notches it, and fires in one smooth, unbroken motion, striking the target directly in the chest and knocking him back against a tree. He slumps to the ground, his head lolling to the side. "Jesus," John says, looking at Rebecca. She nods to him before getting to her feet, walking over and pulling the arrow carefully from the man's chest. She picks up his rifle and slings it over her shoulder. "We can't stay here," John says. "But I'm telling you, I can take him out," Lori complains. "And then what? We have no idea how his people might react." "They seem pretty cowardly," Lori says. "Yeah, but you never know. They might charge up the hill. We'll never be able to fight them off. We've got what we came for." "But we could strike a blow," she says, anger rising in her voice. "We already did," Daniel says, looking at the dead man slumped against the tree. "When they find him, they'll know someone was here. It'll send a message." Lori sighs, and Rebecca walks over and puts her hand on her shoulder. "They're right, Lori. I want him dead more than any of you, but this isn't the time," she says. "Fine," Lori says with an angry sigh. "Come on," John says, scrambling to his feet. "Let's go." The group, led by Daniel, moves back down the hill as quickly as they can. A few yards from the truck, Daniel freezes in place as the sound of voices drifts through the trees. John moves forward slowly through the woods until he can see two figures standing next to the scout. "Where the fuck did this come from?" the older of the two men asks. "How the fuck should I know?" the other complains, before opening the passenger door and leaning inside. The older man moves to the front of the truck and puts his hand on the hood. "It's hot," he says, immediately drawing his pistol. "Someone's here." "Where the hell is Frank?" John looks at Rebecca and then points at the older man. She nods her understanding and puts an arrow on the string. He pulls his pistol and aims it at the other man through the dangling leaves of the tiny saplings. But Daniel puts his hand on his shoulder and shakes his head. "I got this," he says, whispering. John nods and moves aside slowly and carefully. Daniel looks at Rebecca and puts up 3 fingers before starting to count down to 1. Rebecca lets the arrow fly. The shaft buries itself deep into the target's neck, directly between his shoulder blades. The young man spins around and fumbles for his weapon as Daniel rushes out of the weeds and, without making a sound, plunges his knife deep into the side of the man's neck and pulls him away from the truck as blood begins spewing from the wound. He struggles for a moment, trying to stem the flow of blood, but within a few seconds, he collapses face down into the weeds. "How the hell did you learn that?" John asks. "Kali Eskrima." "What the hell is that?" Rebecca asks as she retrieves her arrow. "It's a Filipino martial art." "Well, remind me not to piss you off," she says. Lori looks at the 2 dead men and sighs. "You wanted to send a message. This is a pretty big one." Chapter 33. John. Got some unwelcome news today. I went to see the doctor up in Allensburg. Haven't been to see him for several years, but I've been feeling ill for the last few months. They ran some tests, and a bunch of them came back with results that are quite concerning, as the doctor put it. He put me on a couple new meds and sent me home. I'm supposed to go back and see him in 2 months. Wish me luck, Dad. That was too close, John says, as they're passing the old granary again, heading back toward home. He's obviously sending people out on patrols, or maybe they were just out and about on their own, Daniel says. I doubt that. Yeah, me too. All right, so what did we learn? Lori asks. We know he has around 20 people or so. Well, we have to assume he has more. We couldn't see how many were inside the buildings themselves. I'd say, conservatively, as close to 30. John sighs and shakes his head. Not the news I was hoping for. Well, it is what it is. We need to plan for an attack by at least 30 people, Daniel says. Agreed. John moves on to the rough shoulder to avoid a particularly large pothole, causing the Scout to tip precariously to one side. Everyone shifts to the opposite side of the truck, trying to keep it from rolling over. Damn, John, Lori complains from the back seat. Sorry, I thought I could make it through there. He presses hard on the accelerator, and the old truck lurches forward and back onto the cracked surface of the roadway. Told you I could make it, he says, as a hail of bullets strike the back of the Scout, shattering the rear window. Lori and Rebecca roll onto the floor, while Daniel and John duck down as far as they can. Jesus, get moving, John, Lori shouts. I am. The Scout's engine roars as they speed up. John glances into the rearview window at an old Chevy pickup truck bearing down on them. Is everyone all right? John asks, while steering around a huge pothole in the middle of the road. Yeah, everyone answers. For now, Rebecca adds. Lori, this is on you, John says. I've got this, she says, while loading a round into the chamber. She sets the barrel of the rifle on the back of her seat. Keep her steady. I'll do my best. Give me your pistol, John, Rebecca says. He hands the weapon to her. She pulls the slide back before clambering about halfway out the window, using the rusting roof rack for support, and opens fire. Rebecca, what the fuck are you doing? John shouts. Just drive. John, watch out, Daniel shouts, as he points frantically at another huge hole in the pavement. He wrenches the wheel to the right at the exact moment that Lori fires. Rebecca screams as she loses her grip on the rack and starts to tumble out the window. Daniel grabs the waistband of her jeans and pulls her back inside. Thanks, she says, breathing hard and shaking her head. No problem. You made me miss, Lori shouts at John. Sorry, trying not to kill us. Another stream of bullets tear into the truck. Fuck, Daniel shouts as he grabs his right hand. I'm hit. Lori! I'm doing it, she yells back, sighting the driver of the truck through her scope. Give me 5 seconds. John spots the main highway up ahead through the trees and the massive dip where the two roads meet. You've got 3. The sound of a rifle shot echoes through the interior of the Scout, and John watches in the mirror as the pursuing truck suddenly turns sharply to the right, flips over, and smashes sideways into a large tree. I only needed 2, Lori says. Are you okay? Julia asks as she rushes up to the passenger side of the bullet-riddled Scout. I'm all right. I think I got a bit of shrapnel in my hand, that's all, Daniel replies before climbing out. I take it things did not go as smoothly as you were hoping, Ray says while looking over the battered truck. No, not quite, but we're all okay, except for a few cuts and scrapes. Thank God for that. Actually, you can thank Lori for that. We're only alive because of her. Ray looks at her, and she lowers her head, a faint smile on her lips. It doesn't surprise me, Ray says.
Becca!
Stacia shouts as she runs up to the truck, throwing her arms around her neck. So what did you find out? Ray asks. Quite a lot, actually. We're going to be in for a fight. They start walking toward the house when the front door opens and Robin rushes out. She jumps off the porch and walks over to John.
You're okay?
She asks. I'm okay, Bertie. She stands there, staring at him, her arms crossed. Ray looks back and forth between the two of them before clearing his throat. I'll see you inside, he says, quickly walking toward the house. Are you all right? John asks.
I'm okay,
Robin finally says.
I was just worried about you.
I get that, but what's with the arms? She steps back, her expression darkening.
Why didn't you tell me you were heading out?
What? You were busy. I just figured...
You just figured I was a little girl, a kid, and you didn't want to worry me with adult stuff.
John shakes his head. It's not that, Bertie.
Don't call me that. That's a name for a child. I'm not a child anymore.
It's not a name for a child, Robin. I've called you that since you were little, he says, before taking her hand. And I know you're not a child anymore.
Then why do you treat me like one? I'm almost an adult, Grandpa. And if what I've heard is true, this is not going to be any place for children.
Robin, if I've treated you like a child, I apologize. I suppose I'm trying to protect you from what's coming, the danger that we're in.
It's too late to protect me, she says, shaking her head. Don't think I haven't heard you talking in your secret meetings. Something terrible is coming. And the best thing you can do for me is to help me prepare so I can defend this place. Defend Mom and Jake and you.
That's my job, Robin.
Not anymore,
she says, gently pulling her hand back.
You need help. That's what I'm here to do. You can either accept it or not. It really doesn't matter to me. I'm going to do it anyway.
John stands for a few moments in front of his granddaughter, just staring at her, before looking away and sighing quietly. You are so like your grandmother.
Would she have fought alongside you?
To her last breath.
Then, she and I are more alike than I ever realized.
Chapter 34. John, we built a small cabin near the river that you and I used to fish in. It's mainly for people to stay in when they're working with the cattle, but I also wanted a place to remind me of our good times. I've been thinking about what's going to happen after I'm gone. I would really like you to take over this place, but I'm not sure how realistic that is. Still holding on to hope that I'll see you before the end. Dad. The next morning, John is under the truck, running his hand along the fuel line that leads from the tank to the engine, while lying on his back. He checks his fingers. Except for some grime and dirt, there's no sign of leaking gasoline. He slides down a little further and checks the tank itself for any indication that it's been punctured. He scoots himself out from under the truck and gets to his feet with a grunt. He pulls a rag out of his pocket and wipes his hands. Lori peers around the side of the raised hood.
Any damage?
She asks. Not that I can see. I think we were lucky. I wouldn't say that exactly, she says, looking at the shattered rear window and the multiple bullet holes in the tailgate. Well, it's still drivable and nothing is leaking, so I think we came out okay. Lori lowers the hood, pressing down until the latch clicks shut. She's a tough old bird, Lori says, wiping her fingerprints off the paint. Yep, they don't build them like this anymore. John looks off to the east at the sun as it begins to breach the top of the trees and wipes his brow. Damn, it's going to be another hot one. It's always a hot one. Is she okay? Ray asks as he walks up, shielding his eyes from the sun. Seems like it. That's some good news, at least. So where are we with the preparations? John asks, as he stuffs the rag back into his pocket. We're finishing the last of the pits today. I have Anna and one of the guys from Daniel's group. I think Derek is his name. Putting the Molotov cocktails together. Dahlia and Greg are working on a temporary pen down by the river cabin for the chickens and goats. What about the driveway barriers? Stacia and Sam are finishing up the last one, and then we're going to get them installed. I think we should be done with them by the end of tomorrow, or the next day at the latest. Good. That sounds like things are progressing well. So far, so good. I think we need to have some shooting lessons for anyone who wants to learn. That's probably a good idea, but we can't afford to use too much ammo. I saw some old 22-gauge rifles down in the basement. Why don't we use them? They're not that useful in a firefight anyway. That's a plan, Ray says, before falling silent. What's the matter? John asks, frowning at him. I'm worried about what we talked about last night. So am I, John says, nodding slowly. But we always knew we were outnumbered. Yeah, but I almost feel like it would have been better to have just been kept in the dark as to how bad it really is. We're not going to start that, Lori says, stepping up to the two men, a scowl on her face. Lori, I didn't mean. Zeke and his men are cowards. We've already seen it multiple times, she says. John starts to reply, but she puts her hand up to stop him. I know, but even a bunch of cowards can overwhelm a smaller group of brave individuals. I just meant that sometimes it's better not to know the odds, Ray says, grasping her shoulder with his hand. She nods and smiles at him. Sorry, you know how I am, she says, lowering her head slightly and breaking eye contact with him. I do, and never lose that fire, Lori. We're going to need every ounce of it. Just then, Jason and Phil come charging around the barn at a full gallop, pulling up short just in front of the trio. Jason jumps down even before his horse stops completely. What is it? John asks. We found something, he says. Where did you get this? John asks, holding the folded-up piece of paper in his hand. We were cleaning out Rob's crap, Phil says. He means burning it, Jason adds. Yeah, pretty much. Anyway, we found that tucked into the binding of the Bible that he always kept in the drawer by his bed. What the hell is it? Lori asks. I don't know. That's why we kept it, Jason says. John opens it up and stares at it for a moment. I think it's a map, John says. He looks down at the crudely drawn map again and frowns. What's it a map of? Ray asks. I have no idea. Let me see, Lori says, as she steps up next to John. She studies it for a moment and then tilts her head to the side while turning the paper. I think that's supposed to be the river cabin, she says, pointing to a small rectangle drawn slightly offset. She runs her finger along a line, stopping at a second rectangle drawn next to it. And this may be the old mill. What's the old mill? John asks. It's an abandoned grist mill about a quarter of a mile upriver from the cabin. What about these numbers? He asks, pointing to a series of digits written along the edges of the paper on opposite sides. She studies them for a minute and then looks at John. What's today? She asks. What? What's today? What's the number date? It's July 9th. She looks at Phil. When's the last time Rob disappeared and then just showed back up? He looks at Jason and they frown. I think it was June 10th. It was, 'cause that's my birthday and he was late for our little celebration. Look at this. 6 on this side and 10 on this side, she says, indicating the third number in each row of numbers on opposing sides. And then we have 7 and 9. What time did he usually go missing? John asks. Around 10 or 11 in the morning. What time is it now? Ray looks at his watch. It's 9:15. We've got 45 minutes to get to the mill, he says. For what? To catch Zeke's spy. Chapter 35. John. The report from the doctor is not very encouraging. He says the cancer has spread into my bones. He says they have an aggressive treatment they can try, but it's nearly as bad as the disease. I told him I'm going home. He's giving me 6 months to live. I feel okay at the moment, but he also told me that will change rapidly as it progresses. But I'm not about to spend my final days dying in a hospital bed. Dad. John, Lori, Jason, and Phil are charging across the field toward the river cabin, their mounts throwing up a cloud of dirt and dust in their wake.
Why the hell would he write all that shit down?
Lori asks Jason. He shrugs. He wasn't all that bright. Probably figured he might forget when they were supposed to meet. They pass a small group of cattle standing in the shade of an old maple tree. They look up briefly, with disinterested eyes, and then back down at the tender green blades of grass.
I get that, sort of, but why the map?
Again, bit of a dumbass. Lori shakes her head as they pass the fire tower. They wave to Aaron and Robin, who are standing watch.
She's a strong girl, Lori says to John.
She is. She gave me an earful last night. That's why I asked Darren to show her the ropes.
Well, we need all the help we can get.
True. They start down the hill toward the cabin, moving at a slow gallop. John looks at his watch. 9:30. We gotta get moving, he says, spurring his horse forward. They race past the cabin, and Dahlia and Greg, who are busy working on the pen for the chickens and goats that Ray had mentioned. They slow down on the harder, stonier ground as they descend the slope to the river. The hooves of their horses create tiny avalanches of pebbles and soil that chase them down the hill. That way, Lori says, pointing to the left when they reach the water's edge. Not long after changing directions, they come to a trail through the trees that's more than wide enough for a horse. Hoof prints in both directions in the softer soil show that someone had ridden this trail many times. How far is it? John asks.
Not too far,
Lori says, spurring her horse into the lead. About 10 minutes later, she stops and climbs down, taking the reins of her mount and walking slowly forward for a few seconds before stopping again. John and Jason do the same, moving quietly through the woods. It's right down there, Lori says, gesturing with her head. John peers through the undergrowth at the ruins of the old mill. Most of the stone walls look like they tumbled down years ago, but the massive wooden wheel is still in place, suspended above the river, the water rushing beneath it. How old is this place? He asks. Probably built sometime in the early 1800s, Jason says. Out here in the middle of nowhere? There used to be a settlement on the other side of the river, Jason replies. Whole place burned to the ground around 1850. They never rebuilt.
Enough with the history lesson, Lori says. What are we doing?
John looks around, taking in the landscape for a moment. Jason, take your horse down to the mill and tie it up, and then get back up here. That will make sure whoever comes to meet Robert will think he's here somewhere. Gotcha, he replies, before scrambling down the little slope to the mill.
What about me?
Lori asks. Get up in those trees, he says, pointing to a cluster of older maples spaced closer together. Keep your sights on anyone who shows up.
What about you?
I'm going to be Robert, of course. John scrambles down the hill to the mill, moving carefully through the ruins, searching for a good place to hide. The interior of the main building is completely inaccessible, but some of the exterior walls provide him with exactly what he's looking for. Lori peers through the rifle scope and tracks John as he moves through the remains of the old building. She spots Jason crouched in the trees, well hidden behind some bushes, a rifle in his hands. The snap of a twig grabs her attention, and she looks off to the west. She brings her rifle around, searching for the source of the noise through the densely packed trees. Finally, she hones in on a lone figure making its way along the river west of the mill. Shit, she mutters to herself, looking back to where John is concealed. Hope he hears that. John crouches behind the half-collapsed wall, peering through an opening between a couple of stones at the figure approaching through the trees. "Robert!" a female voice calls out. John watches as a young woman with black hair, pulled back in a ponytail and a baseball cap, approaches the horse they left tied up. She's dressed in blue jeans, hiking boots, and a red t-shirt. She pets the horse gently on the head between its eyes and looks around. "You're here. Where's your rider?" she asks out loud. "He's not coming," John says, as he steps out from behind the wall, pistol in hand. The girl steps back and starts to turn to run. "Don't do that," John says. She stops and sighs, her shoulders slump. "Where's Robert?" she asks. "He's dead." She stands there for a moment, a stunned expression on her face, before tears suddenly burst forth, and she drops to her knees amongst the dense undergrowth. John looks down at her and then up the hill toward Lori. She spots John looking at her and stands slowly, before starting to make her way down the hill. At the same time, Jason comes out of his hiding place, leading their 2 remaining horses. "Are you here alone?" John asks as the young girl sobs. "What?" she asks through her tears. "Are you here alone?" "Yeah." "We're not going to hurt you," John says. "How did Robert die?" she asks, while still on her knees. "I killed him," Lori says, as she descends the hill, using some of the smaller trees for support. The girl looks at Lori and then stands slowly. "Thank you," she whispers, before taking a couple of cautious steps over and wrapping her arms around her. Lori looks at John over the girl's shoulder, and he shrugs silently. "Why are you crying?" "Because that fucking asshole is dead," she replies, releasing Lori and stepping back. "I'm still confused," John says. "You just thanked us for killing him." "Yeah, I'm crying because I'm so happy that prick is dead." Lori shakes her head while slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "What's your name?" she asks. "It's Olivia." "You're going to have to explain some things to us, Olivia," John says. "First off, no one else is with you, right? Because if they are, we're going to kill you both," Lori says, no humor in her voice. "No, I always come alone." "Robert was passing information to you about us, about the homestead, right?" John asks. "Yeah," she says, nodding slowly. "And you were taking that information back to Zeke?" "Yeah," she replies. But John takes notice of the way her expression changes when he mentions Zeke's name. "I still don't understand why you're so happy he's dead," John says. "Because he raped me," she says, as she wipes her tears. Chapter 36. John, it's been 2 seasons now, and our crops are doing even better than I expected. We've been making our own cornmeal and flour, and with some store-bought ingredients like salt and sugar, we've been baking our own bread. We've been selling cattle and sheep, as well as some of our excess crops, and making a pretty good profit. I think within a few years, this place will probably be about 70% self-sufficient. I probably won't be around to see it, but hopefully you will. Dad. That doesn't surprise me, Jason says, as John, Lori, and Olivia are sitting in a circle inside the walls of the mill, using some of the blocks as seats. He was a sick bastard. How many times did this happen? Lori asks, if you don't mind me asking. Every single time we met. What? Did you tell Zeke? She scoffs and shakes her head. He told me that I was playing a great part in the birth of this new world, and that a woman's place is to be subservient to man. That doesn't surprise me either, Lori says, repeating Jason's words. That guy is seriously fucked up in the head. John sighs. I don't know what to think right now, he says. You don't believe me, do you? Olivia asks. I'm not sure. She nods and frowns at him. Have you seen the farm? She asks. You mean Zeke's place? Yeah, have you seen it? John looks at Lori for a moment, wondering how much he should tell this girl. We've seen it, he finally says. How many women have you seen? None, he replies, frowning at her. That's because we're all kept inside. Why? Because we're prisoners. They kidnapped most of us when the blackout happened. They keep us to cook, clean, and fuck, she says, a pained expression clear on her face, mixed with a deeply buried anger. John shakes his head and sighs before frowning at her again. If that's the case, why is he sending you to meet with Robert? Because I was a gift. A gift? Lori asks. Yeah, for him to do whatever he wanted with, she says, her voice full of bitterness. It was a way to win his loyalty. That would have won over Robert in a heartbeat. He always was a bit of a dickhead, Jason says. John nods and looks at Lori. So, what do we do now? He asks out loud, not directing the question to anyone in particular. Well, we can't let her go, Lori says. John studies Olivia for a few moments. Why didn't you just run away? He asks. You're out here all on your own. You could have easily disappeared. Because he said if I didn't come back, he would kill one of the other girls, she says. That means if we keep you here, someone is going to die. She just nods, and John looks at Lori again, and she just shakes her head. How did you get here? John asks her. They bring me in a truck about 3/4 of the way and drop me off. Okay, and you're supposed to meet up with them to go home, correct? Yeah, she says warily. Do you want to get away from Zeke? More than you can imagine. Then we're going to have to kill you. Are you sure this is going to work? Olivia asks as they move through the woods, weaving through the closely packed trees. It should, John replies. I mean, most of the people we've run into from Zeke's group aren't the brightest. That's an understatement. Then it should work just fine. The trio continues along the river, staying close to the water's edge, letting Olivia lead their little group. They left Jason back with the horses at the old mill, because it would have been too difficult to get them through the woods. The path they're following is only faintly visible, but she seems to know exactly where she's heading. After about 15 minutes, she slows her pace and then comes to a stop, crouching behind one of the larger trees. John and Lori move up next to her. He's up there, about 50 yards, she says, pointing up a small rise in the woods. There's an old timber road that leads back to the main highway. Is he armed? Lori asks. Usually. This has to be convincing, but we don't want to kill him or disable his vehicle. We need him to get away, John says while looking at Lori. Why are you looking at me? You know why. She rolls her eyes and then smiles at him. Do you think he'll run? Lori asks Olivia. Hell yeah, he will, she replies. He's a useless piece of shit. Excellent. John reaches out and touches Olivia's arm. Remember, you need to make a lot of noise, and as soon as you hear us shoot, fall to the ground like you've been shot. The more dramatic, the better. She nods. I'll do my best, she says. And thank you for this. Thank me after, if it works, John says. Will do. Ready? He asks. I'm ready. Go. She starts making her way up the hill, screaming as she runs, while John and Lori let her get a little bit of a head start. Remember, don't shoot her and don't kill him, John says. I got it already. All right, let's go. They start chasing after her, climbing the hill in pursuit. Danny! Start the truck! Olivia shouts as she reaches the top of the hill, her arms waving as she tries to get his attention. A skinny, pimply-faced teen looks up from the comic book he's been reading while sitting on the hood of the beat-up 1972 Ford pickup. He jumps down as Olivia runs out of the woods towards him. What's wrong? He shouts back. At that moment, John and Lori breach the top of the hill, their weapons drawn. Stop! John shouts. That's the problem, she yells, pointing back at them. Danny jumps into the truck and starts the engine. Run! He shouts out the window. Lori looks at John, and he raises his pistol and fires 3 shots. At the same moment, Lori fires a couple of rounds into the bed of the old truck. And in an Oscar-worthy performance, Olivia screams and throws her arms up before collapsing in a heap, hitting the ground much harder than John expected. Danny slams the truck into drive and wrenches the wheel to the right as he peels out, throwing dirt and gravel into the air in his wake. Lori fires a few more rounds, hitting the rear window on the passenger side before the truck vanishes down the old dirt road. John stops running, his heart still racing as they jog slowly over to Olivia. She's still lying on the ground, unmoving. You didn't hit her, did you? John asks. No, I didn't hit her. You fired first anyway. Finally, Olivia sits up, twigs, leaves, and bits of grass tumbling off her. I think you just saved my life by killing me, she says, grinning at them.